All right, today we are going to be working on meiosis and genetic diversity. This is a quiz from Khan Academy, so let's go ahead and do it. So, gameteogenesis, or the formation of gametes, occurs when diploid germs, germ cells undergo meiosis. In fruit flies, diploid germ cells contain 8 chromosomes. So, which of the following describes the number of chromosomes in each of the daughter cells produced during gameogenesis in fruit flies? So, it's important to first understand. You can go ahead and pause the video if you know the answer or you think you know the answer. But the important thing to understand about meiosis is that it forms gametes. Okay, so meiosis uh, is a form of, you can think of a cellular division, right? So meiosis, it creates gametes. Okay, it creates gametes. Now, gametes are your sexually reproducing cells, so that would include your sperm and then your eggs, if you're depending on your gender, your sex, I should say. So, meiosis creates gametes, right? So, when we're talking about gametogenesis or the formation of gametes, we are talking about meiosis because meiosis is a process of taking a germ cell, right? A germ cell into dividing that germ cell into the gametes that we know and love. Okay, so we start off with diploid germ cells. So what does a diploid germ cell mean? That means that you have two sets of chromosomes. Okay, you have two sets of chromosomes, one from your father and one from your mother, right? So whoever is producing this gamete, they have two sets of chromosomes, from one from their father, and one from their mother, and these two sets of chromosomes are present in the germ cell. So in the case of the fruit flies, uh, that means that 8 chromosomes is their diploid chromosome numbers. That means that 8 chromosomes is the of two sets of chromosomes, each coming from their parents, right? So therefore, if two sets gets you a diploid number, and our two sets of chromosomes equates to 8 chromosomes, basic um, math will tell us that if we do 2 times a number, we will get 8, right? And that number will be the amount of chromosomes for one set. And if we were to actually do this, it's pretty simple, um, but we would get 4, right? So therefore, our haploid number, right? Our haploid number is going to be 4 chromosomes based off of this logic here. So it's going to be 4 chromosomes. And the reason why a haploid number is 4 chromosomes is because it does not have two sets of chromosomes like the germ cell, but it has only one set of chromosomes. So this haploid cell has one set of chromosomes. One set. And the during the meiosis, you have the germ cell, which is a diploid number, as we can see from here, but then it at the end creates daughter cells, which will become a haploid number. And we just did the computation for a fruit fly, and that haploid number would be 4 chromosomes if remember, haploid is just one set of chromosomes. So therefore, you'd have 4 chromosomes because 8 would mean two sets of chromosomes, right? One from each parent. So now that would be this over here because it remains 4 chromosomes for the rest of meiosis. So it changes during meiosis one, right? So it becomes 4 chromosomes during meiosis one, and then it remains 4 chromosomes throughout the duration of the gamete life, right? Okay. Which of the following correctly describes how mitosis and meiosis are similar? Both mitosis and meiosis produce diploid daughter cells. That is not true. We just talked about it. A meiosis would produce a haploid daughter cell, one set of chromosome, but a mitosis would produce diploid daughter cells because obviously it's mitosis happens throughout your body, and you have your sets of chromosomes both from each of your parents. Excuse me. So one from your dad and one from your mom, right? Sister chromatids segregate to opposite poles during both mitosis and meiosis. This is actually true, surprisingly. So it happens, excuse me, for mitosis, it happens during anaphase, right? During anaphase. So please excuse my horrible handwriting, but it happens during anaphase for mitosis, and it also happens during anaphase for meiosis, but it happens during anaphase too. Because remember, in meiosis, you have a two-step meiosis cycle where you have meiosis one and meiosis two. So in anaphase two, the sister chromatids would segregate. So I'm gonna pick this for now. Let's go ahead and check out the other options and understand why they aren't correctly describing the similarity between these two cell division processes. Both mitosis and meiosis produce genetically identical daughter cells. That is not true because in meiosis, you have something called as chromosomal, excuse me, crossover. So I'm just gonna say crossover because I'm not trying to write all that. But the chromosomal crossover is when your DNA coming from both of your parents, right? It basically takes that DNA and it slices it at random places, known as chiasma, right? So let's draw a little visual of this. Okay, I'll draw it over here. So pretend that I'm gonna redraw that. Pretend this is your nucleus, right? This is your nucleus. All right, we're in the process of meiosis, so we have your chromosome here. So we have your chromosome here, right? Remember, they are replicated, so you have two chromatids, right? Because remember, during interphase, which is what the germ cell does go through, you have that occurring, right? So pretend that's from your mom, and then let's say these chromosomes. So there's four chromosomes, let's say, in this case, the diploid number, because remember you're having an equal two sets of chromosome, one from your mom and one from your dad. So this is the diploid cell, right? So we're still in the germ cell. But anyways, so you have these two DNAs, right? These two sets of DNA. What happens during chromosomal crossover? This process here, right? So this is what I'm describing, is random parts of this DNA. So you're gonna actually have homologous pairs. So these DNAs would pair up, so they would go closer to each other, and these set of DNAs would go close to each other. So basically, a set from both of your parents would go close to each other, right? So then it would kind of sort of look like this. I'll draw it here. So you'd have sort of your chromosome from your dad in this case, and then one from your mom. Obviously, they're not going to be this color. I'm just using some random color. Um, but then what happens is during chromosomal crossover, a piece a piece of this DNA is going to swap places. So a piece of your mom's DNA is going to swap into your dad, and then a piece of your dad's DNA is going to swap into your mom. And this point is known as a chiasma or chiasmata, for the plural name, chiasma. Okay. So that creates the genetic variety, and that's why each of the gamete cells are going to be genetically different from each other because this chromosomal crossover is not predictable. It just happens at random places. Obviously, through billions of years of evolution, it's become much more optimized to the point that it happens at very clean cuts, right? Where the genomes that are being ripped apart, right? Because this is remember, this is the genetic information that's being ripped apart, the places at where they're being ripped apart, it's clean cuts, right? It's clean cuts where it's being ripped apart, but it's still happening at random places within the DNA, right? It's gonna always obviously happen where the chromosomes are in homologous pairs like this, where you have one chromosome from dad, right? From dad, and then you have one that came from mom. Oops, from mom, right? But again, the whole idea is that this whole process is randomized, so you're not going to have genetically identical cells, right? Because their genetic information is being mixed up. You can think of it, it's being mixed up in this case. All right, so it can't be this. Now, crossing over occurs between homologous chromatids during both mitosis and meiosis. So we just talked about that process here. That's kind of cool. But obviously, I just talked about how this only happens in meiosis, right? This this process of chromosomal crossover only happens in meiosis. It's special to meiosis to create that genetic variety and diversity that we have. That's why your brother, although you guys share the same set of chromosomes, like the source of the set of chromosomes, um, the same mom and dad, you still will not look exactly the same. You guys will look similar at best, right? You guys won't look exactly the same, and that's because of this crossover where you're having this genetic variety, right? Because the when these during the chromosomal crossover at the chiasma, right? When these pieces of your chromosome switch over sides, now that new chromosome that's created is completely different than what it originally was because it now has a new allele, right? Right? Allele just means a different genetic variant, right? So it has to be B. Okay. Even though humans are approximately 99.9% identical in their genetic makeup, an incredible amount of variation is seen among individuals of the species. This genetic variation is greatly influenced by the process of meiosis. So this is what I talked about. It's greatly influenced by the process of meiosis because meiosis results in the chromosomes to do a chromosomal crossover, right? So this can be attributed to the crossover that occurs during the process of meiosis. Of the following events that occur during meiosis, what contributes most to the genetic diversity in the human population? So that is going to be not condensation of chromatin during meiosis one, because that happens during because that happens during mitosis as well, and we know mitosis leads to um, genetically identical cells, so that couldn't contribute to the differences in genetics that are created during meiosis. Separation of sister chromatids in meiosis 2, that also happens in mitosis, so you can see how the same logic from here can be applied to here. This is the actual answer. Recombination between homologous chromatids during meiosis 1. I'm not explaining what that means. Alignment of sister chromatids at metaphase plate during meiosis 1. That also happens during the metaphase phase during mitosis as well. Because meiosis 2 is actually sorry, I think I said meiosis 1. I meant meiosis 2. Anyways, meiosis 2 is actually very similar to mitosis, because the genetic of diversity has already been done. And so now it's just kind of replicating itself and creating new cells, right, that are genetically different. Now, recombination between homologous chromatids during meiosis 1 is actually referencing to chemical crossover. Sorry, chromosomal, not chemical. Chromosomal crossover, right? So this is just another way of saying chromosomal crossover. The recombination is talking about how during in the homologous pairs of the chromatids, right? So you have your chromosomes, right? Let's say you have one chromosome like that, two chromatids, remember, two strands of DNA, and then you have another one. These two are in a homologous pair, right? They're in a homologous pair, so they're in a a pair, right? So what happens is the recombination between homologous chromatids during meiosis one. Well, that's just talking about the recombination of a specific part of that DNA. So a specific part of that of the chromatids, because remember, chromatid is a strand of DNA. So it's one strand of DNA within the chromosome that is broken apart. So let's say this, for example, I just randomly added it. Obviously, within the cell, they calculate it and they do it in optimized format. Um, some of this is still being researched and studied, so we don't know fully how it works, but this is sort of like the general idea. Um, but then what happens is these parts of the DNA, they're going to break apart from each other and they're going to swap. They're going to swap places. So that's what the recombination is talking about. They're going to break apart and they're going to recombine with the other member of this homologous pair. Remember, the homologous pair refers to each. I'll use a different color here. It's referring to each of these of these different different chromosomes. All right. Okay. Which of the following correctly describes meiosis? Meiosis begins, with a diploid parent cell and ends with four haploid daughter cells. Meiosis begins with a diploid parent cell and ends with two diploid daughter cells. That's not true. I believe the answer is A, so I'm just going to click on that. Meiosis begins with a haploid parent cell and ends with two haploid uh, daughter cells. Meiosis begins with the haploid parent cell and ends with four haploid parent cells. So the reason why I think it is A is kind of if we backtrack to our first question, where we talked about diploid and haploid cells. Remember diploid? I'm just gonna write DI for short. That is talking about two sets of chromosomes, and then a haploid. I'm just going to use the prefix of haplo. Let me just rewrite that because that was horrible. Um, that is talking about one set of chromosomes, right? So that's kind of like your, I guess, your cheat sheet. But in meiosis, what happens is the germ cell, right, which is the original cell that is divided to create the gametes, the sexually reproducing cells, sperm and egg. So your germ cell, it is a diploid cell, right? It's a diploid cell, right? It contains two sets of chromosomes from each of your parents, right? From mom and dad, right? So a germ cell is diploid. But then, as we know, the the gametes, they are not diploid because they can only contain one set of DNA, one set of chromosomes, because the other set comes from the other parent, right? When if this gamete were ever to fertilize with the mother or the father cell, right? Depending on who we're talking about. So, for example, let's say we're talking about a sperm cell, right? So I'll draw a little sperm cell here, right? Oops. So there we go. So if that sperm cell were to ever fuse with the egg cell, that sperm cell is contributing. Ignore that. Ignore that. Sorry. This sperm cell is contributing 23 23 chromosomes. I'm talking about a human. So this sperm cell is contributing 23 chromosomes, and the egg cell is also contributing 23 chromosomes to make a 46 chromosome cell. And that 46 chromosome cell is the amount of chromosomes that we have in each of our cells after that, right? And since that means that these gametes, right, they are giving half of the total amount of sets that we use in our chromosomes. We know that we're going to have two sets of chromosomes in diploid cells, but in haploid cells, we have one cell. So therefore, a gamete is going to have a haploid cell. It's going to be a haploid spelt like this. So I misspelled the spelling. So that's my bad. Let me fix that. Um, a haploid. So a haploid is sorry, a gamete is going to be a haploid cell because it is contributing only half of the sets because it's only coming from one parent, right? One is coming from the parent. One is coming from the father, and then one is coming from the mother, right? So therefore, it has to be one diploid cell because the germ cell is going to be a diploid cell. But then it'll end up with four haploid daughter cells, and that's it ends up with four haploid daughter cells through the process of meiosis two, because you have two daughter cells during meiosis one, and those two daughter cells replicate to create four daughter cells. So that's why I think this is the correct answer. And yeah, also excuse me in the genetic makeup of these cells, the egg and the sperm, they have only one set of chromosomes, but that one set is a mixture of both the parents of both parents, so mom and dad of the specific person who released that gamete cell, right? So for the female it would be the egg, and then for the male it would be the sperm, right? um, and so, therefore, even though it's only one set of chromosomes, not both sets coming from both of the parents, it still contains a mixture of DNA content from both of the grandparents in this case, for that child that will be created, right? Because of the fact that chromosomal crossover occurs, where homologous pairs start recombination of the DNA, right? um, with the chromosomes within the pair. So it has to be A. And there you go.